Yes, he did. So you see, we concentrate so much on the error that is in what people understand, and we don't understand why they have the way of thinking that they do. God has made it obvious to them that he exists, and that is their context. And when you understand that context, then you have an apologetic approach to deal with that, and not a defensive approach of aggression and condemnation, but be apt to teach in gentleness, with precision. A workman is not ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth, presenting the gospel in a reasonable and a logical way. What is the reasonable and the logic way that an ancestral believing person have? What is their mindset? If you understand how they think, you are able to take that context. No context of human being cannot be found in the gospel. The gospel is the ultimate consummation of all of human reason. It addresses all different elements. So instead of sitting around the table and arguing with the grandmothers and your families and telling them how evil and everything is, and the Africans are going back to their witchcraft ways and stuff like that, being all negative about it, how about you sit back and pray to God and say to God, okay, God, show me how to reach these people. It's not about you and your defense of the gospel and how pure and how holy you are and how amazing you are as a Christian and how different you are from the rest of your family. And they are, look at me, I'm holy. No. It's not about you. It is about Christ who has died for them. And the existence of God encapsulates. When you have that understanding, let me explain Colossians chapter 1. Watch this. Let's go to Colossians chapter 1. Let's quickly understand why is apologetics so important for us and why all of us as Christians need to know. Colossians chapter 1, verse 15, it says, who is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of every creature? For by him were all things created that are in heaven and that are on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions, principalities or powers, and all things were created by him for him. What does this verse say? By him all things were created. There is no context of creation that God is unaware of. There is no context of creation that God is unaware of. Every single thing that a human being comes up with in this world, especially as it regards transcendence, as it regards faith outside of themselves, God is aware of that. God is aware of that context. And if you study any form of faith or any form of belief, you'll see that it falls short of explaining everything concerning God, but it has enough reasonable elements to point to the existence of God. And we have to concentrate on those reasonable elements that point to the existence of God to bring reason to why they should believe in God and why believing God is a superior form of faith to believing in ancestors. For example, because God is before all things, and by him all things consist. Everything exists in God. For me, it becomes very easy to explain to a believing person why Jesus Christ. Because in our African culture, as it is in many Oriental cultures, we sacrifice. We talk about white chickens. Why white chicken? Where does it come from? We talk about a sheep that has no spot when we sacrifice. Why a sheep? And why it is that we don't actually... A goat has a different purpose in African sacrificial practices than a sheep. In the same way that in Hebrew culture, a goat has a different sacrificial reason. It's in there in the Hebrew culture. There's a goat that that would carry the sins and be sent out into the wilderness. Where do we get the idea of cleansing through animals? Like with this, the death, the shedding of the blood has to do with cleansing. Where does the whole cleansing thing come from? That's not a far removed way of reasoning. It's misplaced, but there is a prompting of that kind of belief. Romans chapter 1 verse 19 explains what that prompting is. That God has showed it to them so that no man will be without excuse. That's what that verse means. And when you have been exposed to different cultures and way of doing things, a lot of things make sense. It's one of the reasons why it's so important for us to travel. I think one of what I would love to have happen from now on when we travel together as a group, I would like us actually outside of the church, and when the church stuff has happened, to be part of the community, to just go and mingle with the people wherever we are. Because when you do that, you begin to really realize, oh wow, human beings are more similar than they are different. The problem that we don't know is sometimes when we restrict our existence sometimes in the Christian box, in the Christian incubator, is that we become unrealistic and unable to process the reality of the life that is out there. And I'll talk about that just now, some of the problems that Christianity faces, and the reason why Christianity finds it so extremely difficult in the modern age to evangelize and to represent logical, powerful, apologetic arguments. And this is exactly the same reason why also so many Christians are leaving their faith in such huge numbers. And I'll talk to that because there was a point in my life where I had to decide whether I'm a Christian or not, whether I'm staying, whether I'm leaving. And if you have not been in that place in your life, it doesn't make you holy. Most likely, it just basically means that you have not been thinking at all about why you believe, why the things you believe. Because if you have been thinking about why you believe the things you believe, you will constantly come to that point where you have to continue to believe the things you believe. Because faith is life. And life cannot be life without breathing. Alright? And thinking is a vital component of faith life. And I'll argue today that a lot of Christians don't think. They're just in some default monotonous way of existing. And this is one of the reasons why we have the same statistics in Christianity of divorce, of depression, of suicide, and all of that, almost the same as what the world has. And we're becoming less and less able in this day and age to deal with complex human issues. A few years ago, about 10 years ago, there was a clear distinction between Christians. When you looked at hope, when you looked at depression, you could see a clear distinction between those who believed and those who did not. But that gap is closing at a very rapid rate. Because one important component of Christianity, of the one important advantage that Christians had over non-believers, which was to think, is being slowly being removed and taken out of the church. And people are just more into naming and claiming and tongues and Holy Spirit experience without thinking. That only addresses about one element of our being as Christians. Most of the decisions that we make as Christians have a lot to do with the content of our faith, more than it does with how our faith looks, more than it does the practices and the rituals of our faith. Like praying. Praying is a vital component of us as Christians, and it is an important ritual for us as Christians. But Christ didn't say, go out into all the world and pray. But he said, go out into the world and preach. Preach its seeds, its thoughts, its constructed thoughts that help people to become reasonable and logical concerning what they believe. Because that's what you need. That's what's going to help you when life hits at you. The first thing whenever things that happen in our lives that cause instability, that are traumatic, the first thing that gets attacked is your reason. This is the reason why the first question you ask whenever you are faced with trouble. What's the question? Why? What does why point to? Why wants reasons? Why wants reasons? Why is pointing to reasons? Oh my God. Okay. All right. So before we take a break, here's some of the problems that we have in Christianity today. The assumption and the insistence that Christianity can only be lived and experienced through transcendence is a shortcoming that leads to problematic. It's a shortcoming that leads to problematic predispositions. Predispositions. What is a disposition again? A disposition, again, I've explained the word in the Greek. A disposition is the state of being in my thinking. And it has three important elements. And I keep on repeating these things because repetition is very important. One of the challenges that I've had in our ministry, and I've fallen trapped to this challenge as well, and the people in our ministry also, I think have fallen trapped to this, and I want to just deal with that. We, at least in my own observation, in the Greater Grace ministry, I found that people are so, they always want revelations, they always want the new thing, they always want the most new profound thing. And preachers fall trapped to coming up with a profound thing all the time. And in that process, a lot of things are not repeated. And because they're not repeated, they never really form part of structural thinking. They don't impact the way that people think structurally. And this defies the human structure. Human structure, in terms of thinking, needs repetition. You need to repeat something. You need to hear something at least 7 times before it even begins to become part of your thinking. And then you need to practice yourself with that thing at least 21 to 30 days, over 21 to 30 days for it to become a habit. And for it to become a principle, it's got to be a lot more than 30 days. And so when we just constantly talk about certain concepts and not repeat them, Pastor Stevens, on the other hand, was incredible in that way. He repeated things over and over and over and over again. But I noted, maybe it's my own shortcoming, I don't know, and I could be wrong in this. But what I've noted, and what I noted in myself, when I noted in those sometimes who are around me, whenever we get together in conferences and whenever we get together, we're going to go preach on a particular subject, everybody was just so anxious about coming up with a new revelation. I felt trapped to that. But repetition is very vital. It's important for us as people. It's important. And so I'm repeating what disposition is again for the same reason. Disposition has 3 important elements. It has purpose, number 1. Why is it that you are where you are? Purpose. Why do you do the things you do? Why are you sitting here today? You gotta have a purpose. If you don't have a purpose, then there is a way that you listen without intention. Without a purpose, you listen without intention. And without a purpose, you take it or leave it. You don't consider the things that are being said. And as a result, without proper and thorough consideration of what has been said does not serve you. It doesn't serve you. And then secondly, as I've mentioned before, the background that has contributed to bringing you to the concepts, to the ideologies, to your way of thinking, the experiences that you have had in your life. One of the things that I speak about a lot these days, especially when I'm out in the world per se, and I'm teaching, I'm speaking about mindsets. I talk about approved sources of influence. Approved sources of influence have got 3 different elements. Approved sources of influence, these are if the sources of influence in your life that have a history of influencing you, that will be number one, relational. Relational, you've got your parents, you have your family, you have your friends, you have the people that you work with. And then secondly, institutionally. Institutionally, that is talking about actual formal institution of influence, like schools, like the church, like universities, like whatever it is that you learn in the workplace, whenever you sit in a formal environment where you are being taught. It's a formal institution, it's a formal source of influence. And then, of course, it's environmental. Now, environmental talks about the society. The different environments that you find yourself in, they are constantly influencing you. All right, now as a South African, when you are in South Africa, and geographically, South Africa influences you in the way you think. The media that is taking place around here, the way of thinking. When you are in South Africa and you are a foreigner, you understand what xenophobia is. When you are in Europe and you are a European that doesn't have too much diversity, when somebody says xenophobia, it means nothing to you because you don't even know what that means. So your environment influences the way you think. Approved source of influence. Now the danger with approved sources of influence is that they're influencing you without you being aware that they're influencing you. And they're continuing to build structures of influence, and because they've proven themselves to be credible over a long period of time, you don't exercise analysis, assessment of things that are coming at you. You depend a lot of time on the emotional attachment that you have with the source of influence because of the history. Simple case in point is in South Africa right now. A lot of South Africans are talking a lot of rubbish concerning xenophobia because of emotional attachment to the issues that are legitimate, that make them vulnerable. Now, as the church and as a pastor, I'm going to talk about this now because this is one of the problems that I feel sometimes, that as the church we fail far short of being relevant to the community. So I'm going to talk about xenophobia as a South African and as a pastor and as a Christian. If we understand what we're talking about here in terms of apologetics, you need to understand the context. The context of South Africa, for those maybe, if you're sitting here, you are a non-South African, you may or may not be aware. I'm going to give you a little bit of context so you can at least be able to process it correctly. Zimbabwe can understand this better than most Africans can. South Africa has a history of oppression. South Africa has a history of discrimination. And part of the tool that was used to perpetuate that government was dispossession. What does dispossession do? Dispossession deals with number one need of a human being: safety and security. When you take away people from where they live, you make them unsafe. When you take away their possessions, you take away their security. So what does security mean? Security is talking about food, talking about health, talking about security even in terms of relationships, because there was also displacement that took place, which I'll talk to just now. Are we still together? Right. That happened during the time, not just during apartheid, but it happened even the time of Mfecane Wars. What is Mfecane Wars? Mfecane Wars, the Zimbabweans know about Shaka, know very well. You know him, right? Because some of our people are out there, Mandebele. Yes. They ran away. Those are my people, by the way. They are a big part of who they are. They were part of my Mangete clan. Mashobani and Zwane. They're siblings. Okay? Amashobani that you see in Zimbabwe, those are the same people as the Zwanes. Those are the same people who are coming from who are the Mangetes. I'm giving you a bit of history, and I know South Africans don't even know anything about this thing. Okay? Giving you a very simple history. Mfecane, displacement of the wars also meant the separation between Basotho. That's why you got the Bafokeng, Bahata, and all of that in Botswana. Those people, they came from that side. It was part of the war when the Afrikaners attacked Basotho and Ushaka Zulu also attacked Basotho, and there were also even wars within the Basotho themselves, some of those Bafokeng, Bakwena, they also took their stuff and left and went the other way. That's why in terms of the Hitoka Hawabona, it's exactly the same as Basotho from Lesotho. But Taung, you have Taung also in Botswana. Same people. The people came from Bataung who had their own people. Are we still together? So a displacement happened. That's the history that is pre-apartheid. During apartheid, that became even worse when the British and when the colonialists came. More and more insecurity took place and infiltrated a nation, a people. Dispossession happened. Number one thing is violated. Human beings need safety and security. Secondly, by displacing and separating the people, they didn't have a place of belonging. Are we still together? Through the same move of displacement, what happens? Economically, you could not be able to work in your own environment as a father. You had to go very far away, which basically destroyed the fabric of the family structure. And then lastly is the issue of purpose. With purpose, there are three important elements that you need to understand about the colonialist, the theology of apartheid. There's a book that's called Theology of Apartheid. If you want to read it, you'll understand what I'm talking about. There was a theology behind it. There was an intelligence and a reasoning behind it. And one of those things that they removed, number one, they defined who black people were in relation to humanity. Or did they define who white people were in relation to humanity? It depends on how you want to look at it. But either way, the end result is that Africans are less than Europeans. And then they also used two very powerful tools. First one being intellect. By saying that because of where you look, you are not as intelligent, it basically took away from the material and it introduced a transcendent ideology concerning who we were. And that is one of the reasons why people find it so difficult to process it intellectually, what's going on, because intellect was affected in that way. A way of thinking was introduced in the way that Africans thought and everybody thought, so that even after colonialism was finished, they continued to battle this invisible, transcendent ideology of inferiority in terms of thinking. Secondly, religion. By saying that Africans are immoral and they don't know God, they worship a different kind of God, and looking down even on the spiritual practices without due regard of what I just explained earlier on about what is God, what of them is still God. So by saying that they're not human enough, you basically giving them a subhuman standard. So then you can justify people in your own community who understand the Bible and who have morals and who are moved, who are impacted by Christianity to feel compassion for other human beings. And that's why so much of the church in South Africa, not just in South Africa, but even in the US and everywhere else where these kind of atrocities have taken place, people continued to support that kind of government because they could justify it theologically. They justified it intellectually, they could justify it theologically. Does that make sense? Okay. This is vital. Why is this an important thing? It's an important thing because part of what I do, what you guys may not be aware of, is that with the Lenses Institute, when I went to the US, which we're going to be doing now in Cape Town again, I've been appointed as the thought leader that deals with identity from a biblical point of view. And these are some of the issues that I talk to the church, by the way. I'm not talking to non-believers. I'm talking to the campus crusade of Christ. I'm talking to the staff of the number one leading missionary evangelical institution in the entire world. And they're still having issues of being able to distinguish between black, white, and the diversity that they have. The reason why that is so is because the theology is wrong and the reasoning is wrong. Intellectual reasoning is wrong, the theology is wrong. Intellectual reasoning is wrong, the theology is wrong. So when it comes to xenophobia, we need to be able to understand this is the South Africans pre-Mfecane, during apartheid, post-apartheid. There's more than 80 to 90% of the people who have lived in abject poverty. It doesn't matter who is in power. You can blame the ANC all you want or apartheid all you want. The fact of the matter is that those are individual human beings who have not experienced any relief from poverty. And it doesn't help that the people that are in power, like the police, like the politicians and all of that, have given in on their corrupt being and take advantage by partnering with other desperate people from coming from other countries. All right? They take advantage. They partner with the criminals, the corrupt drug dealers and all of that, and they give them advantage. We all know about the problem of RDP houses being given to foreigners and not to South African local people. These are known realities. Does that make sense? Whose fault is it? You cannot blame the person that has been waiting for an RDP house for 20 years for fighting to and asking themselves, why is it I still don't have a house and somebody who's not even a South African has the house? It's not the fault of the South African, and I will even go so far as to say it's not even the fault of the foreigner, but the authorities still continue to take advantage of the desperate situation of people. And this is what happens when you're part of an oppressed environment. Oppressed people oppress other people. Does that make sense? So the people who are in authority continue the oppression, and they continue to emulate what they have seen from those who have been in power, and they process sometimes that freedom is my ability to take advantage of other people, because people who are free take advantage of other people. In all of this, it is still the regular and the normal South African who remains disadvantaged. Does that make sense? Right. Now, when which is what sparked the current situation, and I don't see it coming down anytime soon, because the emotions are very, very high. Now, when the people that came in, and this is what we need to understand, it's got nothing to do with the fact that for the most part, South Africans and non-South Africans live peacefully with each other. There are triggers in any environment. There's certain things when you see, they trigger you and they break the camel's back. When you have a group of foreigners fighting the police in your own country, no human being is going to sit around and say that's okay. Think about it in your own home. In your own house, in your own family, your siblings, there's somebody that comes, maybe the child from next door, who has had problems in their home, and they come and stay with you. And then all of a sudden, they turn around and they turn against your parents. Do you sit around and say, it's okay? It's okay, your family here helped us for some time, it's okay, you can turn around and, you know what I'm saying? These things, they trigger. And when people cannot fully process what's going on, they rely on what? Emotions. The only thing they can respond to is emotions. And emotionally, when you see that kind of something like that happening, when you yourself would not even dare do something like that, breaks the camel's back. This is not a fight so much by South Africans against non-South Africans, but it is the reality of an oppressive environment. The one who is the most vulnerable is going to be the most oppressed. And in an oppressive environment like South Africa, an African is the most vulnerable on the hierarchy of oppression. Do you understand? It makes you most vulnerable. You are the most vulnerable right there at the bottom. And that is the nature of a structure that is void of God. The survival of the fittest. The one who has the most advantage is the one that's going to basically oppress. The majority of South Africans still remain, black people still remain oppressed, they still remain dispossessed and being active from the economy. It's not so much that they have a problem with foreigners coming in and doing the businesses. Otherwise, they would not, by the way, they would not even have given them the opportunity to have tuck shops and all of those things if that was the case. The reason why they've allowed non-South Africans to come in and really flood the spaza market is because they provide a service to them which makes their life easier. Affordable food and all of that. So it becomes quite obvious what the problem is if you just think a bit further. And then you begin to understand that this is the problem right now. And that the way that the system is structured in such a way that the people that have the power and the authority still maintain their power and authority, and the ones who are at the bottoms are the ones that have to fight and scramble for the crumbs. And it's a scramble for crumbs more than it is a fight against a brother. Even in the time of drought, families in Somalia, in Ethiopia, they began to eat each other in the family. Do you know that? You know that human beings started eating their children. And we need to understand that South Africa was the last hope of Africa. So this is where the final battle for crumbs for Africans takes place. What the solution is, I have absolutely no idea. I'm just giving you a simple analysis.
That was going to be my question.
I have no solution. But part of being able to come up with a solution is to be able to understand what the problem is. And to analyze the problem through observation. And then you can begin to consider what solutions are. Part of the solution, I believe, is the fact that the church should take up its place in helping people to understand what their value, what their worth is. I believe that if we actually came up with, my thing is that, if we taught children from a very small age what their value and their worth is and what being a human being is, in terms of the way that the Bible describes it, human beings will grow up understanding and revering human life. There's no reverence of human life because we've taken God out of our own structure of thinking. And therefore we're relating only from alliances. We are aligning with our African brothers because we're all Africans. But when it comes to the crux of survival, you're not my brother, my brother. I'm going to kill you. It happened in Rwanda. Right? It happened in many different countries. It happened in Zimbabwe between Amandebele and the Shonas. It happens in Nigeria with the Igbos and the Hausas and all of those kind of people. It happened in Germany. It happened everywhere in the world. This is a human phenomenon. And then again, you need to understand why is it that what's happening in South Africa is being categorized in a particular way, whereas what happened in other parts of the world has been categorized in a particular way. This is not for the topic today. But this reason and logic is an important part of apologetics. And if you are an apologist, which I regard myself as, and every one of us should, according to what the Bible says, that we should all be able to give a reasonable defense for the hope that is inside of us, one important component of that is that you have to exercise yourself. You're thinking a little bit more than what you are comfortable in doing. It's not fun thinking and sitting around and about these. But if they bother you, you have to become part of the solution. For me, it bothers me that the church is failing and losing the battle of, or rather losing the race of being the catalyst of love. People don't look for love to the church anymore. They go to other places, but we're supposed to be the catalyst of love. That's a problem of apology. That's an apologetic problem. It's an apologetic problem as far as practical living is concerned. And Paul is saying, if we're living our lives correctly, there will be questions concerning why we live our lives the way we do. Then we get an opportunity to tell them reasonably and logically why it is that we are the way we are. And right now, the difference between Christianity and the non-Christian world is becoming very gray. We're no longer the light. There's a dimness in between because We don't know the light is fading, and there's a dimness. And this is the problem, this is the challenge that we have today with apologetics. Can Christianity be able to help South Africa with xenophobia? I believe we can. I believe we are the most skilled and the most able of all the lot to do it, because we speak about one Spirit, one God, one faith, one Jesus Christ. We speak about the one love. That's a stolen term from us. One love is not a song with us. That's our motto. But so many of the fundamental components of who we are, we have surrendered to the world because we have failed at being able to be custodians and being stewards